Order the Finance Committee for the City of Palo Alto for Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. And I'll just note that Mayor Lowing is substituting for Council Member Lithcott Hames. Clerk, please call the roll.
Committee Member Reckdahl.
Here.
Committee Member Lowing.
Here.
Chair Burt.
Here.
Have a quorum.
Thank you. Our first item is to allow members of the public to speak on items that are within the purview of this committee but are not otherwise on the agenda. Do we have any speakers?
We have no public comments.
All right. So we'll move right into action item number 1, which is to recommend that this committee recommend to the City Council adoption of a resolution amending utility rate structure D1, the stormwater and surface water drainage, reflecting a 2.4% CPI rate increase, not to $17.61 per month. And welcome, Karen.
Numbers. My name is Karen North. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works, overseeing Environmental Services Division. So,
Did you?
my microphone not on?
Yeah. There we go.
Good evening, Karen North, City of Palo Alto, Environmental Services Division. Can you hear me? Online? Okay. So this one is a voter approved stormwater ballot initiative. So every year I come to you to come to the Finance Committee to get authorization since our voters did approve the increase. But just to remind everybody, slides, please. Sorry. Thank you, Francesca. You can go to the next slide. So this is the 26 proposed rate increase. So this is to remind everybody the stormwater management fee is broken down into 2. The base component is 55% of the fund's ongoing stormwater management program. So that funds the litter and water pollution prevention programs, engineering, and storm drain system maintenance and emergency response. And then the other approximately 45% of the stormwater fee sunsets in June 1st of 2032. That funds infrastructure projects. So the voters approved 13 projects, stormwater system replacement and rehabilitation projects, green stormwater infrastructure and innovative projects. And then just to remind everybody, in fiscal year 24, our debt service from the previous voter did go away. Next slide, please. So these are the projects that the voters did approve. So as of right now, we have completed 3 of the 13 projects. So I know it's a little hard to see on your screen, but we tried to give you a little visual to see where they're all at, which ones have not started, but which ones have been completed. So the not started are in black. The orange ones we're beginning the design. So you can see we've got Hamilton Avenue in design, and then Center Drive in design. And then we've got design completed, and we're going to start construction this year. Those are the ones on the West Bay Shore and the Corporation Way Pump Station. And then we have some that were completed in 2017, and then some that were completed before the 2017 with the previous ballot measure as well. So lots of the capital engineering team is busy. We are struggling though to get good bids, and we are keeping track of that. So costs have escalated over time. Next slide. So this is the fiscal year 2026 proposed rate increase and the impact. So it is a 2.4% increase, which is the alignment with what the voters approved with the consumer price index. It will increase the monthly equivalent residential unit by 0.40 cents. So we'll go from $17.20 to $17.61 per monthly bill. And then it will give us an extra $211,000. Any questions? I know it's probably the fastest.
Yeah,
ever.
pretty perfunctory, but why don't we see, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
No public comments.
Okay, questions or comments?
It'll be one of our easier decisions
Yeah,
this
Ed?
year.
I have a couple.
I just was gonna ask, are you commenting on the contractors because they're busy and they're raising their prices?
Everything's just harder to get bids on,
All right, not,
Especially civil engineers.
just so people are aware that it's in the record.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, so which budget fund has come out? Is this out of the general budget or is
No,
it?
this is it separate. So the voters approved the stormwater fee, so it's a separate enterprise fund
Okay,
that my team manages. And
and
it funds a bunch of projects within Public Works.
if you run out, then can we put money from the general fund into that or is that,
Yes.
okay?
But that would be
But
council approval.
Ideally, we don't.
Correct.
And so when we wrote that, why did we tie it to the CPI as opposed to some other index? Because I would think that, coffee and eggs is not really highly correlated with civil engineering projects.
That was what the voters decided to tie it to when, probably because they didn't want their bills increasing significantly.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Well, and I'll just add, I don't know that the voters were given that choice. It's how the proposal was designed by the committee that put it to the voters. Voters didn't have a choice of which, once they either voted up or down on that proposal.
Correct.
This
But
was a citizens initiative or is it? Okay,
The Green Ribbon Stormwater Committee. So I sat in those meetings as well, but those committee members are really concerned about not having an increase more than what was already, because the stormwater fee was going to sunset. And they were really concerned about not exceeding it. They wanted to keep it the same and they didn't want it to grow too much.
okay.
So they were the ones that proposed it.
Right. Got it. And then one thing is that you're asking about what happens if we don't get through the project. So the last stormwater bond measure, I guess it's bond, is it, or fee
Fee.
period. Toward the end, we started running up against the ability to complete certain projects. And that actually drove us to an innovation in the Southgate neighborhood of the green stormwater infrastructure. And we were among the first to do anything like that. My understanding is, as a result, in this program, we look to those methods as a default where they were applicable. It was my memory. So, and now the state is moving forward on green stormwater as well. So we were really at the forefront.
Cost savings.
Yeah, and it was ecologically better. It worked well. If you ride through Southgate, you see all those sort of French drains of different sorts, and they're aesthetically great and lower cost. And so necessity bred a really good outcome there on that. But then the other question I had is on when you had that slide of the different projects, the images, the Hamilton Avenue one, which actually will have a moderately significant benefit for
You want to put this slide
Yeah.
back up?
which slide? That's slide 4.
Slide 3, actually.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, for some reason it's yeah.
Slide 4, yeah. Sorry, wearing lots of hats these days, so apologize.
And that'll have a moderately significant benefit on the flood protection for San Francisco Creek.
Slide,
Yeah.
slide
whatever.
4, but yeah.
Yeah, that one. But I had understood that we were ready to break ground this year. Now that's still in design. What's the construction and completion timeframe?
I'd have to get back to you on that one because
Okay.
I don't have our engineering team with.
Okay. Well, that's that. Out of everything, I think that's perhaps our highest priority. And so I'm concerned that it may be slipping. And each winter that we don't have it puts us at a higher risk. And it ties in with this misunderstood conception that that the residents in the middle stretch of San Francisco Creek, the areas affected from around Chaucer down to Bayshore, have received no flood protection since 1998. And actually, the measures that we've already done of the downstream protection, which and then the culverts through 101 and East and West Bayshore have had a tremendous impact. The 98 flood basically was backed up by the creek. It couldn't flow into the bay because there wasn't capacity downstream, and there was a dam at 101. And those things have had a huge impact. And I just want to have this opportunity because to talk about this, because there is a big misconception that nothing's happened. Then on top of that, we have done a pump station and stormwater improvements that also had a very favorable contribution. This is why 2 years ago, that small flood, which wasn't the volume of the 98 flood, wasn't much worse than it was, because basically, yes, we overtopped the banks, but then the water flowed for the most part through the storm drains into the bay. And that's the difference.
Where was the pump station that we put in?
San Francisco Creek Pump Station,
It's at East Bayshore.
East Bay Shore. So along the East Bay Shore, there's a huge pump station that goes in there.
And that pumps water from where to where?
It pumps basically all of that area of Palo Alto out to San Francisco Creek, so it's not getting stuck.
It wouldn't flow. It didn't
into
have
the
the
creek.
outfall enough
Yeah,
without the pump
there
station.
was not the hydraulic capacity, otherwise it would be stuck. So now it gets into the creek faster.
Okay.
And then also San Francisco Creek got wider, so it can handle more hydraulics. And it gets the water out into the bay.
Yeah, in 98, if we had had the pump station, we would have been pumping water into a lake and backing it up even more. So all those things knit together. Yeah. And the 101 in East and West Bayshore were not performed by the Creek Authority. They were Caltrans projects that actually Joe Simidian, as a state senator, really led on getting those through. So there are a lot of folks who really made a contribution, but I really do think that the Creek JPA and we are not telling the story of the benefits that we've actually provided already. We still need to do the middle reach, but there's a gross misconception that we haven't done anything that benefits it. Okay.
What is the date of the Hamilton and Center projects?
Well, that's what
That's what I need to
Carmen's.
get back to you on.
Okay.
Yeah. And other than that, this is pretty perfunctory. So I will move that we recommend to the council the amended utility rate structure Schedule D1.
Second.
Yeah, vote. We can do, we don't have to even do a roll call, do we? I've got everybody here. All in favor? All right. All right. That passes unanimously. I will note that the title says increase to 1761, which I understand what that means. And the presentation clarified it's a 40-cent increase. I would put that 40-cent increase in the title.
Okay.
Because people, 40 cents, geez, what's that? You know? And
Well, we can change that for now.
yeah, great.
I just reuse the same staff report.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And that moves us to our more substantive item tonight, which is that the committee consider recommending to the council adoption of a resolution amending oops, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. That we recommend adoption of a planning and development services cost of services study and propose municipal fee adjustments. Good evening. Who's kicking off?
I'll be kicking off. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Lowing, members of the Finance Committee, city staff. My name is Oscar Murillo. I'm a senior management analyst with the Planning and Development Services Department. I'm here with Director Late and Chief Building Official George Hoyt. We are here to present the findings of the cost of services study, aka the fee study, and the proposed fee adjustments for the development services program area, which consists of building, planning, fire prevention, and public works. First slide, please. This study provides a comprehensive update on our fee structure to ensure that fees align with actual service costs, cost recovery is fair and sustainable, and that the Finance Committee and City Council has information needed to make informed decisions on potential subsidies. Next slide, please. The City of Palo Alto has a variety of fees, close to 1,000 at the moment. And those fees are cover various different services from community services departments, where you have fees for classes or programs, which are considered high benefit. And then you have fees for development services, which are regulatory in nature. They cover a variety of services for which a homeowner, an occupant, or a business owner might come to the city to get assistance with for a permit. Across the street from City Hall, we have the Development Services, the Development Center, where those permits related to building permits, planning applications, inspections for fire prevention, and public works permits may be attained. And so these fees are covered in our cost of services study. We are not covering any citations, code enforcement violations, things like that, or any of the other fees that are not related to development services, as those are covered in separate policy discussions and separate studies. The guiding document that we have for our fees is the city's cost recovery policy. This was approved by the City Council in 2015, and it provides a framework for which fees are to be recovered. We have three groups, low, medium, and high, based off the public versus private benefit of each of those. Most of the development services fees are in the high category, which is 70 to 100% cost recovery. Next slide, please. To note, the council does have the discretion to subsidize any of these fees for policy reasons as well. So a little bit of background on a fee study. Fee study is a comprehensive analysis in which we look at the total cost of providing services related to the fees that we're looking at. So in this case, we found out which of the departments are associated, which of the staff members, which titles, which things like that. And we sat them all down with the managers and with the consultants to look at each individual fee and the amount of time that it takes to perform each fee. We looked at the entire process, who's involved, cross-departmental support, things like that. We factored in the actual cost of doing business here for the city, overhead, IT, administration, things like that. And then we provide a revenue versus expense breakdown. It's not exactly a science in that we don't have a snapshot in time at the very moment. We can't see the actual revenue for the entire year right now at the very moment, and we can't see the actual cost. What we can do is we can look at the costs that we had at the adopted budget for fiscal 25, and then we can look at the last full year of revenue, which is fiscal year 24, and we can compare those two. And we can see if the amount of revenue that is coming in corresponds to the amount of cost that is associated with that. And so what we did is during this process, you can see table 1. It basically is a summary of potential under recovery. So when we looked at each of the individual fees, we determined that some of the fees were not accounting for all the time associated with providing that service, with the review of the application, with the coordination with different departments, with the entire process. And so what we do is we assign a value to that time that is not being accounted for in the fees. We use the salary and benefits of the staff associated with it, with all the other costs, and we provide that in this table here. And we can see that for building and public works, we have a higher cost recovery. And for current planning and fire prevention, lower cost recovery. And this is something that is not out of the ordinary. Other cities have similar figures here. As fire prevention, the development service related components of that, which is not fire suppression or life safety, they typically are subsidized by other cities. Same thing for code enforcement, same thing for long range planning. The revenue that comes in is not equal to the amount of expenses that we have related to that. So in the extensive report that we have, which is, I believe, 18 pages, we have an attachment A, which breaks down all the fees, what the current fee is, just the base fee, not the tech fee that is added on top of that, or any other fees that are on top of that. And then we look at the actual cost based on the time and the analysis that we provided. And then we can figure out a cost recovery level. And so the purpose of this exercise is to try to position the city a little closer to full cost recovery in the future. What this does not mean is that there is a $2.6 million gap in the general fund that is covering this. It does not mean that development services as a program area is running a deficit. Because after looking at the past few years, we can see that it is a net positive. Even during the pandemic, when we used the development services reserve fund to cover some of the dips in revenue and not lay anybody off, we can see that there is a little bit of work to do to get to full cost recovery per the policy. Next slide, please. And so we do fee studies every 6 to 8 years. It's been about 9 years for us. We last did one in 2016. The department, Planning and Development Services Department, was 2 separate departments: the Planning and Community Environment Department and the Development Services Department. And so since then, we've fused them together, and we tried doing a fee study in 2022, also with Matrix, the consultant that performed the current one. And we got to almost the very end, and it was decided that because of the uncertainty related to the pandemic, it was best to hold off on any increases. And so the Development Services Reserve kind of floated a little bit, and now enough time has passed where we've proceeded with a new fee study. And so the goal of this is to align with the cost recovery policy and to figure out if any subsidies are to be addressed. And so what happens is some fees go up, some fees go down. Increases that occur are typically associated with increase in number of hours or different processes or increased regulatory requirements that require us to spend more time on any given fee. And staffing adjustments that have been made since the last fee study. So since we last did this in 2016, positions have been added in building inspection, across the board with planners, in public works, you name it. So those have not necessarily been captured in the fees. What we do between fee studies is that we have standardized increases, which are referred to as the general rate of increase, the GRI, or for some fees, the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index, which is a different variable that is more applicable to this. It's basically to keep up with inflation. And so as we across the board increase certain fees, some fees are going up and down by different amounts, and so that creates a discrepancy over time. As contract services and overhead increases, that increases the gap. And so what this attempts to do is to reset that, to figure out what each of the fees actually cost us, and to get closer to those levels. Obviously, some of those fees are going to result in drastic increases. And so that's where the policy discussion comes in, where you can decide for policy reasons what should be subsidized and how much, and whether it should be phased over time, things like that. And so we have a number of major changes, which I will just briefly highlight by program area. Sorry, 1 second before that. We have a number of fees, and we have different fee types. We have flat fees, which are a fixed rate for services that are predictable in nature, which we can estimate what it would take to provide that. We have valuation-based fees, which are used for building permits, and those scale with the project valuation to reflect different size and complexity of usage. So $1 million project versus a $50,000 project would have different price based off that. And then there are deposit-based fees. These fees are a little bit more comprehensive and a little bit difficult to estimate the actual value. So we provide a deposit that is then reconciled later once we have a full accounting of what it actually costs to provide the services. Sometimes projects don't go all the way. Sometimes they require modifications, things like that, so that we have that.
I can just interrupt you for a
Yes, please,
minute.
please.
To the committee, we can, I think we're about halfway through our slide deck. Would you like us to hit some of the more of the high points as we go forward, or do you want us to continue? Just recognizing that you probably had a chance to look at some of this information already.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys had a chance to digest the report well enough to.
So maybe we can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I would try to find it.
We'll provide an overview, and if you have specific questions, please feel free to interject and we can provide answers to that. For the building, major changes, George is going to provide a little bit of an update. We have a few changes we'd just like to highlight for you as well.
The things that we did was we restructured how we.
Thank you. Thank you, council member or mayor, council member Hepburn. George Hoyt, chief building official for the city of Palo Alto. One of the things that we did was we changed our structure of how we established the valuation of construction projects. Our current model was very complex and it based off of a lot of different factors as of the type of building that we were building, the type of construction and the square footage. And as one can imagine, as you get into commercial multifamily projects, it can be much more difficult to establish that basis. So we are transitioning to a valuation-based model. And for single family, we're going to actually convert it back to square footage of the residential structure. And so there's a tier permitting plan review or building permit fee schedule based off the square footage of the structure. So we can simply look at that table and see what the square footage is and what building permit fee will be. The plan review fee will be a percentage of that building permit fee. And then the other departments that review it will have other percentages. On the commercial and multifamily end of things, we are going to go with the construction given valuation of the project. We will look at that valuation to determine if it's adequate within range of what it should be. And then we will base our fees off of a tier valuation square footage or tier valuation table that is in our published table. And the plan review fees will be a percentage as well. That was the biggest change we made.
Single family.
Why the difference between going per square foot for single family, but for other projects doing the
Valuation base.
Yeah.
Single family is easy to establish because the square footage is there and it's not necessarily as complex and there's construction throughout that structure. Where, for instance, like a tenant improvement or a commercial building, you may have big floor square footage areas that they're not doing a lot of work on. Maybe it's office space or something that is just not a lot of tenant improvement work. So it's easier to base that way and it makes it more equitable.
But would the ADU be square footage base?
The ADU is proposed to be square footage base.
Oh.
Or not square footage base, but yeah, square footage base off the table.
So same as single family
Yep.
formula. Okay.
That's correct.
Yes, next slide, please. I'm sorry about that. The comprehensive plan maintenance fee is proposed to increase a very small percentage, 0.133% to 0.136%, again, to reflect the actual costs. And the DS Development Services Reserve Policy, sunsetting in June 30th of 2025, is basically used as an emergency fund. It has primarily been used during the pandemic more recently. And it is proposed to be extended another 5 years as well. Next slide, please. This is just a snippet of the actual cost recovery policy. As mentioned, the fees in question here are all on the bottom, the 70 to 100%. We are assuming 100% for all fees, but that is at the discretion of the committee and the council to recommend something other than that. Next slide, please. Just high level, why do the subsidies matter? Well, if we increase the prices too much, people will bypass the permit process. And so that may matter more for some, especially when safety is involved. We've identified some fees, which we'll discuss in just a bit, that maybe we could consider a discussion on. But they also can, advance and support our policy goals and remove barriers for minor residential work, which are, important to us here. We have provided 3 separate options, which are low, medium, and high at 15, 50, and 85% for your reference. Next slide, please. and they are provided in the supplemental report, attachment A. This category, electrification or sustainability. These are a group of permits that pertain to this category. The items highlighted are for your consideration for potential subsidy, as well as the amounts of low, medium, and high subsidy. For the projected subsidy columns, we took basically the difference between the actual cost and the current fee, and then we multiplied by the average number of permits that we issued over the 3-year period to get an estimate there. And next slide, please. Same table for electrification permits or for trade permits. And next slide, please. And so decision points for the Finance Committee. The only actual subsidy that we currently have on the books is childcare centers, which we get 0.3 per year on average, one every 3 years. And we had currently set the rate at $218. The actual cost is much, much higher. We're proposing keeping it at the same rate. And also asking for direction on the rest of the fees at full cost recovery, as well as any subsidies that you might want to consider us to provide. Next slide, please. The timeline that we're looking at potentially is Finance Committee. Should this require multiple meetings, this would go into later dates. But if it can result in one meeting, April, May would be potentially the City Council's consideration of this recommendation from the Finance Committee, and then it would be rolled into the 2026 budget process with all the other fees. One thing to note is that is a special legal requirement that we not implement the fees until 60 days after the adoption. So typically that's sometime in August as the council adopts the budget in late June. We are here for any questions regarding any specific fees, any increases. We have the consultant matrix available as well as managers from the departments listed here as well.
Thank you. Why don't we see if we have any members of the public who want to speak first?
No public comment?
Okay, colleagues? Ed?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One thing I wrote in my notes was what you just said, is that if we get too carried away with this, they'll find a way around the permit. And then we have a bigger problem because our safety is being compromised and structure is being compromised. So I appreciate that tone in terms of what we're trying to figure out here. At first, when I was reading this, it looked like we were trying to recover what I would call variable costs. But the more I dug into it, it seems like you're really trying to figure out everything we're spending here in terms of a percentage of your time, and so on. I can see why we needed a senior management analyst for that. I mean, that's a lot of number crunching. So you basically feel like you've taken everything possible and gotten it into sort of the fee. So you're not leaving anything out.
That is the idea.
Like the finance department that helps us, we get a little piece for that too.
Yeah, so the idea is that we view it as a bit of an enterprise fund, even though it actually isn't. That it's a self-sustaining fund. That when the budget process rolls out, they assume that development services is cost neutral. And so at the end of the year, we look at if there's net income, and then we factor that into the development services reserve contribution. But yes, we try to run it so that it's completely cost recovery. Obviously, that's not black and white. People pay prices and have interest, and we have policy discussions. And so we try to keep that in mind as it's a balance between fiscal sustainability and making things, policy discussions, making things affordable for people.
Yeah, there's a question here for us, not for staff, of how do we tell what's our messaging to the citizens? Because that's what I paid my taxes for, is to have people in City Hall that are giving me my building permits and all that kind of stuff. So there is a messaging there when the fees go up that we have to address. Not today necessarily, but it's there.
Yeah, but
relative to where we go on fees.
I don't think of that as a problem, that building fees are building fees. They're not tax.
Well, they're also variable projects. You don't have to put in your hot tub, but if you do and you have to get a fee for it, then you should pay for it. I get that. But,
right. No, I don't see an issue there in terms of the message.
Okay, we'll have a discussion about that after the first story comes out in the newspaper.
Okay.
Well, it shouldn't be a problem whether people accept that or not.
Yeah, I'll just say there's a separate question of whether our fees should be set where they are. But I don't see that as a philosophical one of whether fees are different from what you get from taxes. That's my point.
People still, they don't like paying money regardless, whether it's a tax or a fee, they don't like it. So, are you done, Ed? So some of the numbers here are quite different. You know, like the certificate of use and occupancy is like $1,000 more than we were charging $1,000 more than our actual cost. What happened? Is technology change, or did we just have bad accounting? Or
Part of this, part of the process looks at finding efficiencies in what we're doing. So, you know, we do our best to do that, but sometimes we would go under the assumptions from 2016 that the process was a certain amount of hours, a certain amount of time, a certain amount of cost. And as a result of this new analysis, we've found it to be a lot less. I have Courtney on the line from Matrix to provide a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
Or George on that.
I have some additional feedback on that. So the item that you mentioned was the UNO that is associated with the building permit. So a UNO is just actually the final document of certifying the building as a particular occupancy. There is no review that takes place. All that takes place in the building plan review and the inspection process. So previously, we just had one standalone UNO fee that we would charge for all applications. We created a new one that is associated with building permits that just looks at that particular administrative portion to process that UNO.
more narrow now.
No more narrow focus, where the standalone UNO is still, it's somewhere, it's around $1,300 versus 14. So
Okay.
does that answer?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Chair, may I go back to the question earlier, the concern or the concern from taxpayers indicating, you know, we're paying taxes and why are fees going up? If I could call our attention to the staff report, the section, it's on page 3. It talks about the cost recovery level policy, the 2015 policy. I like this because it distinguishes that these fees are for transactions that primarily benefit a private individual, whereas taxation is really to benefit the broad general public. So if I'm coming in for a room addition, there is a private benefit there and I should pay those costs. Whereas those that enjoy a public park, that's public taxpayer dollars. So that's how we distinguish the use of tax, like property tax and sales tax, versus when a member of the public pays a fee. So this exercise is really doing a cost of service study to really understand for these transactions, what is the typical hours and staff time incurred, plus indirect costs for those transactions that have primary private benefit. And so I apologize if I'm saying something that the committee is already aware of, but I just want to ensure that for the record and those that are watching, the distinction between what taxes generally pay for, which are broad public benefit, and what fees are really supposed to pay for when it comes to government finances and services. So thank you.
Okay. You also said earlier on at the very beginning, you said that we're not running a deficit. The planning is not, it's fairly balanced. But yet in the staff report, it says that we only have 71% cost recovery.
Yeah, unfortunately, I find it to be very confusing myself. It's trying to assign a monetary value to time that is not being captured. And so when we factor that into the revenue that's coming in, it creates a deficit. And so it's not an actual deficit, but in the future, if we kept doing that particular permit that has a deficit, we would be retaining less and less and less, and we would be moving toward less cost recovery. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that by increasing the fees, we're immediately going to have a surplus of revenue, or that as a whole, it's going to increase. It's just putting us in a direction of getting closer to fiscal sustainability.
Okay. So, but we weren't running a deficit before.
Correct.
I guess I
So some
I missed
fees-
the nuance there.
Well, it's more for the study. We try to look at what it actually costs right now for these things.
Yeah.
And so we're comparing it from a prior year, the revenue from the prior year and the workload, and we're seeing what that looks like. And so it's not an actual apples to apples, but it's the best comparison that we have. And so what it's saying is that for the fees, we're not capturing the entire time.
Okay, so you're saying we need these new fees in order, so in the future, we're not running a deficit.
Correct. To avoid a potential subsidy in the future, yes.
Okay, but in the past, we were able to tread water and we want to continue treading water. And so therefore we have to adjust these fees.
Some fees are over collecting and some fees are under collecting. And so it balances in a way and it's creating a more equitable situation.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Can you go to slide 11? I want a clarification of that wording about the 60-day. It says there's a 60 days after adoption. Is that 60 days after adoption of the fee schedule or of the budget?
The fee schedule.
Okay. And do we want to move that up so it takes effect when the budget takes effect?
That's something that we've internally been kicking around as well. So we're seeking to see how this deliberation goes and the referral to the council. And if we can, it would be cleaner. But at the same time, we also have the citywide municipal fee update that's coming to the finance committee in April. So we're going to align those various pieces. And to the extent possible, the cleanest approach would be to make all the fees effective July 1, if we can, recognizing that any land-based fees, I believe that's the technical word. I don't think that's land-based development fee. Property, thank you. Property-related fees, those have a 60-day noticing period between effective dates. So yes, we would like to do that if possible to make these effective July 1.
Okay, so then that means a council vote has to occur on May 1st or the second reading has to be?
I don't believe the fees have a second reading. They're not ordinances.
It's okay.
It's a resolution.
So just the vote has to be by May 1st. So it takes effect 60 days later.
Right,
Okay.
right. If that's not feasible, then because we want to make sure council members of the public have an opportunity to chime in on this process, we would then notice it accordingly on the master fee schedule. So it'll notate the fees and when they're effective.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for a really informative report. I still do want to dwell for a moment on this deficit or not. So on page 6 at the bottom, it says fee study summary findings. The user fee study identifies a 2.6 million shortfall in cost recovery. And that is a forward that if we don't adopt them, we would have that shortfall, right?
Correct. Yeah. If we charge the current rates, if we charge the current rates, the current expenses would have a shortfall, yes.
Right. But that means that we are almost at that this year. I mean, that shortfall has presumably accumulated since our last study was 2016. When did we do our last fee update?
The last fee study, the comprehensive fee study was 2016, but we do an annual update.
Annual fee update.
Which is about 2 to 4%, depending on.
Okay, but are we saying that last year's fee schedule fully covered everything and our costs are going up by 2.6 million in a single year?
No. There has been a net income in each of the prior years for the development services operation. Some of the program areas are a little more, have a higher cost recovery than others.
So in net,
So revenue was higher than expenses at the end of each year.
Okay.
But in terms of accounting for the missing time, we have to put it into the equation as dollars.
Okay.
And so that's not being captured. And so to capture it, we would have to increase the fees that are associated with that.
Okay. Great. And then you alluded to the fact that we've added staff in recent years and if we didn't increase these fees, the report says we might have to reduce that staff. Same time, when we add staff, I think three things happen. We pay less overtime, we pay less to outside contractors, and we reduce the permit or the time for customers before they get the permit. We're improving on that. And so, and for a lot of, people doing construction and things, time is money. And so there's a real value to the customers for the fact that we're reducing our time to grant permits. And we all know this was something that we've received criticism on. Do we have any data on the cycle time improvements?
I'm sorry, I don't think we have that for this meeting, but what we can do when this report goes to the council, we can include that data as part of that. And we're also looking to do some information online too, to much like the housing piece. We also want to do a similar front-facing report on our system improvements for development services.
Good. And then I don't know whether as part of providing that data, we do any comparisons to adjacent cities.
We could take a look at that and see what sort of reports and available information may be available online. We could also reach out to their different departments and see, if we can collect that data. That would take some time and effort, but we could take a look at that.
I think that'd be really valuable because it's two things. One, we ask ourselves, have we improved? Yes. Have we improved enough? How do we judge that? And a lot of that is that comparison.
Yeah, understood. And we can endeavor to try to do that. Another metric, I think, is, or metrics, survey results that we're beginning to collect some information on that, which is positive. And two, anecdotally, there are fewer complaints coming in. They haven't gone away.
Fewer is good. Few is best.
Few is best. And we might be closer to the few, considering how many permits we actually issue in a given year. So we'll look at that as well.
Okay, good. And then the last area that I want to dive into is all the things related to electrification. And thank you for that slide. First, on the issue of bypassing, it's one of the things that we came to understand as we were going through the SCAP process in recent years was that we were, for instance, on the triggering of transformer upgrades that was occurring. And we, at first, our utilities department said, oh, it's because of all the home electrifications. And we said, wait a minute, we haven't done that many yet. How could that be it? And it was EV chargers. And most of all, it was that EV buyers were being told by dealers that, gee, you should put in a 50, 60 amp level 2 charger and you can charge your EV in 3 hours at home, which is great, but it was triggering a crisis in our grid. It was slowing down the ability to do electrification because we didn't have the transformer capacity. And what we really found is those are oversized was one thing. But the second part was that we didn't really have good data on how many chargers were going in because such a high percentage were going in unpermitted. And we found the same thing on heat pump water heaters. I don't know what other categories stand out as ones that we are aware of that folks are bypassing permitting routinely. Do we have other categories that we either suspect or know?
I would say it's bathroom, kitchen remodels is one of them. I would also say just water heater replacements in general.
Yeah.
And probably furnace and heat pump replacements for condensers. Those are probably the highlights that come to my mind.
Yeah, I certainly had heard it on water heaters and EV chargers, but makes sense what you're saying on the others. So then we have a question of how do we or other cities reduce that bypass or leakage there in the permitting? And are we aware of kind of tools that cities routinely use to try to cause a greater conformance?
So there's two that we have identified, and I'll ask George to weigh in if there's more. One we've identified in the staff report, which is the, just this is where making the fee not
Owners.
onerous, where somebody is discouraged from that, but also the process is the second thing. If you have a low fee but a arduous process, somebody needs a quick turnaround, they'll be discouraged in that regard. One of the things that George has been able to work up is for kitchen and bath remodels in particular, where we did get some complaints about bandit contractors doing weekend work to do, kitchen and bath remodels, is that we now have a instant permit where contractors can go online, pull their permit instantly, low fee. And, for those who want to do the job correctly, we have a low barrier, low cost way of doing that now. And we're looking to expand those offerings as well. We have the Solar App Plus app that is another way, including energy storage systems to help with that.
Not everybody may know what
Yeah.
we have done on the Solar App and the Solar App Plus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, instant permitting for now we've opened it up to all of the contractors who want to pull a permit, right?
Yes,
for
that's
solar.
correct. All residential qualifying solar and battery storage systems that are done by a licensed contractor has the alternative to go through the Solar App process, which basically AI's the review of it, spits out a checklist at the end of the day. They come into our website, they pull an instant permit online as a licensed contractor. They put in the approval information from Solar App, and it instantly prints out a permit for them. And then the inspections take place from there. We've done something very similar for residential heat pump water heaters, and we've utilized it in the heat pump water heater program from utilities. It's been a success where the licensed professional goes on, pulls an instant permit, reduces our fees because we don't have to do a plan review. We don't have to take it in through a pre-application process, just cuts a lot of the process out. And so we're looking at expanding that wherever we can.
Well,
Kitchen, bathroom
then that
remodels.
touches on the other part is how much is it saving us to have a more efficient automatic online permitting? How much does it really save our customers on it typically? And maybe we can't quantify that as easily as our own costs, but it's a lot cheaper and easier for them too. And then the time is money issue. This goes back to John, something we've talked about is these various improvements that we're doing. If we were to ask the average resident whether they think we have, or even business, if what they think is our condition, they're going to talk about what we used to be. And so where are we on telling our story?
So like housing, there's a story to be told when it comes to our permitting operations. And we have made some significant progress, specifically with respect to electrification. It does fluctuate based on our staffing, and we do have some vacancies that are impacting some of our operation in terms of review for all of our permits. But we're working on those. And Council has appointed or authorized a position for me last year, a special projects manager, and that recruitment is underway to fill. And that is an individual that will be working with me to help tell the story, working with our communications office and other departments to get the message out on that. So I hope to have that done, initiated here soon.
Well, and I would encourage you to toy with using ChatGPT when you feed in the information. And it can just accelerate drafts of these things, and you can tell it to do different versions and emphasize different things. And once again, just like your solar permit, 3 seconds later or less, you've got a new draft.
Yeah, I will. So we'll do that. And I did, there's an element of us wanting to get our house in order a little bit before we start pushing much of that news out. We want to see some progress in these other areas. We've done a number of pilot programs internally just to assess how folks want to interact with us. We want to meet them where they are. And we find that even though we've offered in-person appointments at the DC, a lot of people tend to support virtual appointments, which was a surprise, I think, to us. But we still have, set up a system where we can, again, meet people where they are. And we're constantly trying to, just adjust the system, do some training, try something new. We have experimented with AI in other areas as well. And unfortunately, it's not quite where we need to be on a few areas, but we're still open to it.
Well, and it's rapidly advancing. They got a new version coming out imminently. We actually have a citizen volunteer who last night offered to help on this, who is a senior data scientist at OpenAI, and very willing to help. On EV chargers, I have this recollection that I think under state law, there is a threshold at a certain level 2 amperage. It's an over the counter, or what? Is there a threshold that basically streamlines the process for, was it up to a 30 amp level 2? I can't remember.
Sorry, not off the top of my head. I do not recall, but I do know we have process for that.
Well, and
for EV charging.
And the point being, do we look at incentives that has lower fees or more streamlining if we incentivize residents, mostly in this case, to be lower watt approaches to their electrification, smarter approaches, rather than give me a 400 amp panel, give me an 800 amp panel, because I want the juice for everything. And the lower watt approaches don't stress our grid the same amount, and I just am interested in whether there are thresholds there that we can use. And tonight's apparently not the right night to go into discussion, but I'll just put it on the table. And then
Sorry, you're referring to AB 1236.
there you go, quick.
Yeah.
And do you know what it says?
Yeah, it has expedited permitting for level 2 chargers for 1 to 3 days after filing complete applications.
All level 2 or up to a certain amperage?
It doesn't, I have to dig into it more quickly. I can get you some information quickly, but I'll have to dig into the rest of it. So we can take a look at that and then also just make sure that we're in compliance with that, with our review processes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Senator Becker has legislation that he's putting forward that would, if I understand it right, require remote inspections for heat pump water heaters installations. And what was explained to me is really that for a heat pump water heater, contractor can take photographs and there's no need to have a physical inspection routinely. Have we looked at whether it's in that circumstance or any others, as you've been talking about the efficiency on the permitting? What about the efficiency on the inspections? Are there certain circumstances where we can go in that direction?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start and ask George to weigh in. So during the pandemic, we of course had an opportunity to experiment with that further, and we did a certain amount of inspection verifications with the contractor, either taking a picture or using, a video to, live video to sort of show what's going on. And I think as George will probably say, in some instances, it probably does make sense, but there are some concerns that we have about what information we're being shown on the receiving end of the video. And there's just maybe some things that get missed, but I do think,
And that's by licensed contractors as well, you're still concerned?
Well, I mean, one that would require the licensed contractor to actually fill the inspection, to go there, be prepared to look at certain things. I think that my experience from doing inspections and being there, just looking at something globally and standing back and looking at things, I may see something different that I would not see otherwise. And so if I'm concentrating, okay, look at the vent, look at the TP drain on the water heater, look at this, look at X, look at Y. Yes, I'm covering the basis, but there may be something that is just out of the norm that I may not see. And at the end of the day, the inspections are to make sure that it's installed properly and that there are life safety conditions are done. I also know there's proposed legislation that perhaps contractors self-certify the inspections. And so, I think we're looking into all those that are being proposed.
yeah, certainly if there's any state law requirements on that, we would comply with that. And then I don't think we've had the conversation recently, but where there are opportunities to make it easier for our customers, but still make sure that we're doing the minimum job of ensuring the minimum safety standards that we check out. That's the balance that we just try to strike.
And then going back to this bypass and compliance issue, you mentioned several essentially carrots that we're offering, that we want to make sure that the amounts are low enough that they don't discourage going through permitting and that we streamline the process. But once we've done those things and provided, whether they're carrots or reasonable baseline, whatever it is, are there other tools that we should be looking at in terms of consequences of avoiding permitting? And, we have contractors who don't just do one job in the city. They do a lot of jobs. We've heard historically in some areas, contractors have avoided us because of our difficulty, but as we're improving those things, do we get to a point where we hold the contractors responsible for not accepting a request from a customer that bypasses a permit, and that there are consequences to the contractor? Now, we still have to find those occasions where it didn't happen, but just kind of the liability risk to that can have an impact on compliance. Whether we can track down those cases and hold them accountable is a different story. But if we have we have a consequence and an education process for all those contractors, would we elevate the compliance?
So again, I'll ask George to weigh in on this. We don't have any local legislation that would establish consequences, as far as I know, about contractors who are subverting some requirements. I don't know that it's licensed contractors also that we're constantly having that issue. It could be folks who are unlicensed, who are just trying to do some work, and that through that mechanism. I will say, there, I don't recall any specifics offhand, but I know there's been some cases where we've been concerned about contractors who have not, for whatever reason or another, we've talked about filing complaints to the contractors board. I don't think that's happened recently, but that's an avenue.
An avenue, but it seems that we could look at penalties that we have. And if we've got a circumstance, as George was saying, where, we don't want to do a virtual inspection because an inspector might catch something that would not occur virtually, but we get half of the time that we don't even do any inspection, are we once again creating a a disincentive by saying, well, if you file for a permit on the hot water heater or the EV charger, which are two that I'm aware of, we have a real low batting average or not a good one. If you file for the permit, you can't even do a virtual inspection. It has to be in person. But if you bypass it, you don't have to do either of those. So that's a bit of
Yeah.
a dilemma. And
So I think bypassing is always an option that's on the table that they can choose to do. But I do think that we do have enforcement mechanisms and fines and penalties that we can apply. And we do respond to work without permits, or if we drive by and we see work without permits, our code enforcement team and our building inspection team identify those projects, issue stop work orders. We have in the fine schedule, we can fine $500 for each violation, a violation of a building item, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, if we choose to. As well as we can double fine them on their plan reviews and building permit fees, and that is in our fee schedule to do that. And we do that. We've also have a close working relationship with the Contractors License Board. We have contacts with them. They reach out to us when they have concerns in the community. For instance, people pulling owner builder permits, but not really doing owner builder work. And they've been investigating those type of activities as well. And if we have a constant licensed professional or an unlicensed professional is doing work, we can communicate that through the Contractors License Board.
those are a lot of good ways that we attempt to get compliance. And yet what I've been told anecdotally by people who are kind of in the know is that at least on the EV chargers and water heaters, the traditional gas water heaters, it's maybe a 50% compliance. So I would really be interested in us coming back and just re-looking at one comparison to other jurisdictions. Does anybody have a more effective compliance rate or different tools that we could just consider? Or are there other mechanisms that we can come up with, whether we have to invent them or can borrow them? Okay.
And certainly
Yeah.
for EV chargers, you could look at the history of flow of your current and you can see that something changed and that could be somewhat automated.
We now that our utilities department does have meters that monitor that, when they see peak increases, they send us an inquiry and we go out and investigate those inquiries.
Okay.
All right.
Chair, can I just confirm the follow-up you wanted related to lack of compliance? Is it focused on the EV chargers? Because I believe staff did mention we have quite a few tools from a citation perspective.
Two that I was aware of are EV chargers and hot water heaters, but George had mentioned some other categories that they're aware of that I'm not. So
Okay.
it's really where we have low compliance, wherever that may be, is to just really come back with how can we, what measures have other cities done or otherwise that could improve that.
Okay, wonderful. And then if I may graciously ask committee, we are seeking some direction relative to subsidies and areas of subsidies. In the slide, we notated in yellow a few of those, particularly with the focus on the safety side, and we've offered 3 options just as a point of reference. If we can get some direction on those or others, then we could move it forward to the council as well. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and on the electrification on the slide that you had previously presented, don't know what slide number that's the slide 8, I think it's the way it's listed here. I'm down on the HVAC systems. It says current fee is $63.96, and the low cost recovery would be basically 2 to 4 times higher than the current. Am I understanding that correctly? That we're way below our costs
Yeah,
on those.
That's correct.
And yet that's something we want to incentivize, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the 15% is us just picking the mid-range number. What does it go from 0 to 30%?
30 and 50.
So-
70.
So it doesn't have to be 15, but we just wanted to give you it could be any sort of number.
So is this the same fee for any HVAC, regardless of whether it's an electric heat pump or a gas HVAC?
Yes.
Oh,
Currently, it is one fee for all types, and so we're proposing tiering it out.
oh,
Provide a
okay.
little bit more equity so you can see the difference in prices. So we're saying that everyone pays $63.96 now because in fact, there's just one fee, but in the new system, it would be tiered, so that is a little bit more equity.
Okay, so we don't have that tiering in front of us. You're just looking for guidance.
The
on that.
tiering is in front of us. We have,
Oh,
we have tiering for air handling of groups of 5 direct replacements. So a unit is there, we're directly replacing it. Where, for instance, if it's like and these are multifamily and commercial. Multifamily and commercial, if they're new and a new curb, then there's additional. Without a curb, there's a
Yeah, but,
cost.
I'm
And then
talking
single
about-
family is,
heat pump electric tier versus gas.
we do not
tier.
have that tier. It's all
Okay.
one.
That's the tier I'm most interested in, is how do we have, if we're gonna subsidize, I don't want to subsidize replacement of a gas system. Why would we want to do that? We're all trying to eliminate that. And yet we have a very high subsidy, basically, not one differentiating gas versus electric, but a high subsidy for those, as it is. And so I'd be real interested in bringing the gas systems up to cost and not subsidize it at all. And I'm interested in what my colleagues think. And then very significant subsidies on the electric.
Same things like. Yes. pool heaters.
Yeah,
Most pool heaters are gas at this point, yes.
Got that one.
I didn't highlight it, I don't believe.
nope, Mike.
It's not highlighted, but it's cheap.
Because it's a pretty easy installation, pretty easy inspection. The cost to do the work is minor compared to the mechanical cost for
So
HVAC replacements.
So understanding that there may be an opportunity to pull off the heat pump, systems separate from the gas systems. And then the question is, if that was of interest to the committee, where would you want to sort of place that subsidy? And understanding that what we don't cost recover fully is then offset through some other revenue source, and general fund is one, but then we would look for any other options that might be available.
But under the proposal we had, if we were looking at a heavy subsidy for gas and electric, and instead we have no subsidy for gas.
Right.
Don't we come out better?
Well, yeah, and to be clear, these are highlighted just to bring your attention to it,
Okay.
as opposed to a staff recommendation where we're asking that you subsidize these.
It's really conceptual.
Yes.
Feedback tonight.
Well, you can give us, yeah, we wanted to flag it as an area for consideration to advance carbon reduction goals and the other, the bypass and childcare services, which we've historically have done. And one that we actually left off is we actually do waive the planning entitlement fees for 100% affordable housing projects. That's another one that we do, and we would assume that we would want to continue to do.
I think that was in the staff report, right?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So then what would be helpful for us is to get a sense for, are there, in addition to affordable housing and childcare services, are there other permit types that this committee would be interested in subsidizing, presumably to advance, other policy interests? And if so, do you have a range, or, you don't have to identify the exact fee, but you can tell us, we want a low cost recovery. That would be enough to give us some.
I would say on the electrification, I'd be very inclined to a low cost recovery and a full cost recovery on the gas. But understanding the financial implications of that would be also important. Colleagues?
Yeah, I agree in concept. The cost to inspect a gas implementation as opposed to electric, is it roughly the same? Is it gas more expensive?
It is roughly the same.
Okay. How do you inspect gas? You check the seals on all the pipes and,
The only additional aspect of the gas inspection would be to make sure we pressurize the gas system to make sure it's not leaking.
okay. But you don't have natural gas sensors and check that it's not leaking at all?
We do not. We have other mechanisms that we utilize, but pressure test is one of them.
Okay.
We also check it with soap and water to look for bubbles as
The high-tech method.
utilities
yes,
will. Unfortunately, high tech, but very effective.
But gas sensors are much more routine now, aren't they, for methane sensing?
Yeah, they are. And we could, right? I mean, we
But-
don't, our inspection staff doesn't carry those.
But why not?
We could. we
Yeah.
could.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what we're trying to get at.
Yeah.
And then a question is that actually lower cost for everybody involved than the pressure sensing? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it depends on the scope of work, right? If they're just replacing a few joints or a small piece of pipe, okay, then maybe the sensing is a good alternative. Keep in mind, we asked the contractor to do the tests, the soap and water, the tests that we want to see. If it's a large caliber of gas replacements, pressure test is the only way to go, and it's the method within the code to test those systems, because we're not going to go around with a sensor on every single joint, and many of those joints may be concealed, and so that's why a pressure test is relevant.
How about carbon monoxide? Do you test that there's no carbon monoxide being leaked?
No, but we require carbon monoxide detectors to be installed, and we test to make sure that they are working at final inspection.
Okay, so then if there is a leak, then people
Yes,
will
the
report
sensors
it.
will go off. Yeah.
Okay,
And then the daycare and the affordable housing you had asked, and I would support that. But at what level do we current subsidize those?
Well, so affordable housing is 100%.
100%.
Planning fees, they pay for consultant costs, direct consultant costs. And I want to say the childcare fee is subsidized by maybe $6,000 or so. But we also don't get very many of them. We get one
every 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And were there any other categories that you had in mind as potential
So those
subsidies?
were the main ones. I feel like we've addressed the sort of the bypass issue in part with the incident permits that we're trying to build out, but we wanted to flag that as an area of concern that we have when folks aren't going through our system. But we're always looking for ways to try to improve that and make it less of a obstacle for folks.
I agree. That's even more important than the money.
Mm.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Because as a homeowner, you say, oh, do I really want to do this project? And you're thinking about how long it's going to take to get the permit, not what it's going to cost.
But us really pursuing better compliance there is linked to the things that you described on how we've eased the process, made it more streamlined. So that's two halves of the story, is say, here's what we've done, and now we expect everybody to pull a permit.
And I think there's an education component there to educate the community, the importance of the permits and why it is important to get them. If it's not just to document the resale purposes.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of compliance, Chair, I just wanted to ask for some flexibility. I think earlier we talked about safety as a component to make sure that it's, we're getting permits that also address safety issues. And so if some of these that we analyze as staff, if the cost is higher because we want high cost recovery on the gas, but should staff see that as a safety concern and may trigger lower compliance, I think that's a nuance that I'd like staff to have some flexibility to bring back to council, because while that
Yep,
might be
good.
contrary to our electrification policy and goals,
Yep.
it is not contrary to our concerns about public safety.
Yeah. Good point.
from a compliance standpoint, is multifamily generally better than single family, or do we have compliance issues pulling permits across the board?
I would say we have compliance issues across the board.
Okay.
We don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And if we knew everybody that wasn't complying with our
Yeah.
rules, it'd be a different story.
So, give you one story. A neighbor wanted some HVAC work, and this was just a few months ago. And his contractor said, I'm not going to pull a permit because on the plans, apparently Palo Alto requires adding a lot of notes on that. And he says, what am I, a third grader? I've been doing this for 30 years. Why do I need all these notes on the plans? And he just viewed it as mindless hoop jumping. Do we have a feeling about the paperwork required in Palo Alto compared to other cities? Because he says that other cities don't require this and Palo Alto does.
We hear this often. We hear how our process is more arduous and more complex. It takes longer, it costs more. And then we talk to another contractor who loves our service and how efficient it is and how we're better than any other jurisdiction in the region.
His quote.
Well,
Yes.
each of these you got to take with a grain of salt. Like we don't, we know we're studying where we want to learn more about where we're too bureaucratic and have too many rules and too many, requirements, and try to scale those back where we can and really just focus in on, the service that we want to provide to our customers, make sure that the buildings and the structures that they build are safe to occupy, and focus on our permitting operations and doing it with so that people feel positive about the experience that they've had working with the city, even if they don't want to even if they don't want to go through the process. At least if they do, we're striving to treat everybody respectfully and make that as painless as possible. And I think some of the feedback we're getting at least is trending in that direction, which is helpful.
But you have a good idea what other cities require out of a contractor compared to what Palo Alto requires?
We do, and we try to align along those lines. I will say that we are making improvements, right? We're building out our building plan review team internally. We're developing that team. I think there'll be a lot of opportunities for face-to-face interactions, if they're in person or virtual, to be able to explain why it's important to put this note on the plans. And if we can put the note on the plans for them to help alleviate the thing without going back and forth, put this note, oh, you put a note, okay, maybe it takes 2 weeks to do that, where perhaps we could do it in 10 minutes in a call. We are exploring those options. We're encouraging those options. And I think the biggest improvement that we can make is the face-to-face interactions with the customers that are putting these together to explain why we need something extracted from them and to get it moving forward.
Extraction might be a little harsh. But
When I remodeled, the city inspector came through and found out that their electrical subcontractor hadn't properly torqued down the front panel.
Yeah.
And that's a fire risk, right? And so there's value added to having the city inspector come through. So we have to balance this, right?
Chair, if I might also ask for one area of leniency as well as the committee considers their motion tonight. The area of supporting the sustainability or electrification fees and programs may, as we look at it with staff and funding availabilities as the committee has identified, we may consider baking the cost or the cost reduction into the rebate programs as opposed to reduction in the permit fee specifically. So just in terms of the administrative mechanism, want to be fully transparent in one way may be a better outcome or process.
Well, that's interesting to think about, but it makes me think about Lauren's point that if they're in the rebate, is that are folks less inclined to pull a permit if they first see they focus on the permit fee rather than the rebate? And I don't know. There's a lot of behavioral psychology on this, and so I think we should look at which one will result in the greatest compliance.
Sure. And I think
But you would need the permit, wouldn't you, to get the rebate? Or could you get a rebate without a permit?
That's a good point.
No, we would, if we were to do something like this, we would identify probably something like backup or confirmation completion of the permit in order to receive the rebate itself. To put some of that onus on,
That's true.
obviously both
Either
the
way.
compliance as well as.
It's a good point, though, that
Mhm.
they're not going to get either of them unless they apply.
You have to pull a permit to receive the support.
Yeah.
So
So that makes
we
sense.
would make sure that those kinds of strings were and compliance actions were there. But just wanted to highlight that administratively, we may opt on a rebate format as opposed to a permit.
And is the advantage of having it on the rebate that we would get reimbursed, like some federal or state grants or for the rebates, or?
No, typically it's administrative, frankly, in nature, because you have typically the SCAP programs are running through specific utility, sustainability, climate programs and are more robust than just, say, a permit cost. The rebates are associated with certain either on-bill financing or as we're incentivizing heat pump water heaters. And so there's two kind of financial mechanisms set up. One is these SCAP programs and another is the actual pulling of permits with the building team. And I think for us as staff, figuring out where that activity would be best placed administratively, both for efficiency, so we're not creating extra red tape, as well as for the user interface as well.
So if I choose on-bill financing, can I take the permit fees and roll that into the on-bill financing?
Ooh, I don't actually know. I would need to talk with our team in terms of how that
But,
matriculates through in each of the current SCAP programs.
but yeah, I can see you'd want some flexibility there so staff can think about it.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
So our recommendation to council, you're asking that we have the amendments as outlined in B, but then there's this additional guidance. Does that modify the additional guidance, modify this recommendation? And so we would,
Yes, I think you would, in your motion or consensus tonight in your referral, also give us some guidance around the subsidies. So a little paraphrasing of the last 30 minutes.
so move the staff recommendation with additional requests that staff, when they return, have a strong subsidy for alternative for electrified appliances and not a subsidy for gas, except for considerations of compliance with seeking permits, how that might affect it. Now, that's a long wording, but, and then also that we would continue essentially the same permit subsidies for daycare and affordable housing. And any other issues that we should be incorporating in the motion?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay,
Per square foot is not part of that. And you can do that independently. The switching over to per square foot.
Oh, yes, that's part of the
That's
fee
part of the
study
motion.
and
Okay, good.
staff recommendation.
second.
Second.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. All right.
The question is, does it come back to Finance Committee? It will then now advance to the council with the recommendation from the Finance Committee after staff evaluates based on the direction tonight.
And then does the finance committee then get this in April again with these changes, or? Yeah, it has to go to the May adoption, right?
In order for it to reach July 1, it would have to go to council by May 2nd. So when I look at the council's April calendar, it would need to be on one of the regular meetings. So yes, if we wanted to have effective date of July 1, we would bring it as a separate item.
But with these additional changes, I wouldn't want to throw that at the council and have them not have any recommendation on that. So would just those come back to this committee before then?
So if I can speak, we don't feel compelled to have this be effective on July 1. I think my preference would be to have it go in the ordinary course of the regular review.
That's fine. I guess I need to clarify with Chair. Is Chair wanting these items with the subsidies to come back specifically for finance review and confirmation? So then the full listing can be recommended specifically. Is that the wish of this
Yeah,
council?
I'm wondering whether
or
we could
committee?
go forward with the non-contentious items and then just
Oh.
have this it's really just the electrification stuff that would come back, right?
There would be a period of time when the subsidy would not be reflected in the fees.
Correct. What is the wish of this committee? Does this committee wish to provide direction on a specific level of subsidy for specific fees? Or would you like to provide this general guidance for staff to nuance that and bring that directly to council?
I'd be interested in having on the electrification, a follow-up discussion with a couple alternatives. As you know, we had the alternative, we were saying, well, no subsidy for gas and strong subsidy for electric. We had the alternative, as Kylie said, well, but maybe we bake the electric subsidy into the rebate. And then we have the concern that you raised that if we have too strong of a fee structure, we may, for the gas, we may run up against a compliance with permitting requests.
Okay.
I think that needs to come back and have that feedback, what staff has looked at that more deeply.
Okay.
And then the question in my mind is, does that mean the whole package has to be held up for that? Or is there a way to bifurcate that?
If staff is okay with this not taking effect July 1, because then we could bring these particular items back for finance committee review and then package it all together with the other citywide and make this effective 60 days after the adoption. So we will then bring those back, those specific items back over the next couple of months, and then align it such that when council adopts the master fee schedule, all of these will be incorporated.
Great.
Is that, and then so we'll
that-
look
that
at the
works for you.
calendar.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Yeah.
I have one question. So suppose our housing, like the HIP program is really popular and you run out of staff. Right. So if you find demand for your permits and planning is higher mid-year, how does that work? Because you're kind of treading water. If you have all this business, that means that you could pay for that employee. So it's not like a budget impact, but it is a budget impact because we have to hire someone.
Right. So we're constantly monitoring that service level. I think the city council has been very supportive of requests that we've brought forward in the past that are fee backed or fee supported. So we'll just continue to monitor that. We're still trying to get our whole complement of staff onboarded. We've done well with the inspection program. Unfortunately, we have a couple of vacancies planned and otherwise. And we're still trying to shore up our plan review side from the positions that the council gave us for the current fiscal year. And, it remains a bit of a challenge to hire some of these technical skills, but we'll continue to monitor that. And we also have the ability to engage consultants as needed to handle adjustments that are sort of outside of our normal course of work. If it goes beyond that, then we would come back to council with a request and explain how that's going to be supported by the fees.
Okay, but that's straightforward. We've done that in the past.
Yes.
Okay.
Mike, Chair. Thank you.
That passes unanimously and completes this item. Thank you. Two final things. One, I just want to make sure that there was a request for Public Works to, they can just send it as a note on the status of the Hamilton storm drain and the timing for completion. And then upcoming meetings of this committee.
Chair,
Yeah.
for that status update, would it be okay if we include that in the report to council?
Sure,
That way it will be
Sure.
formal.
great.
Upcoming meetings, we have a hold right now for March 25th, TBD. And then our next meeting for Finance Committee subsequent to March 25th would be April 1st, where we'll be looking at a couple of the fee updates for utilities, the rate updates. And so that will be the utility rate season, which is April.
And I'm just looking at whether I had anything. Okay. Oh, and there's one follow-up that hasn't occurred from a year plus ago, which was the proportionate share of the wastewater treatment plant upgrades to the partners based upon current usage, basically. And Public Works staff had committed to the council that we'd have it as a follow-up, and I don't know when that would be coming.
Are you talking, Chair, about the annual operating costs or the CIP investment?
The CIP.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
We can make sure that the team is able to talk about that when we talk about, at least just at a cursory level, when we talk about the wastewater collection allocation or fees, I should say, which will be on April 1st. And then if I'm not quite, we'll have to figure out where we're at in terms of whether or not it's at a point where we could agendize a formal
Okay.
dialogue on it.
All right. Thank you. And I think we're adjourned.